Bosses who kept going back to old clubs as Ferguson begins another Everton spell. Everton icon Duncan Ferguson has been handed the reins on a temporary basis again by Everton after Rafa Benitez was asked earlier this week. The ex-Liverpool boss was finally put out of his misery after a nightmare stint at Goodison Park. And the Goodison hierarchy have turned to Ferguson to boss the team while they search for a permanent replacement for Benitez. This is the second time that Ferguson has in charge of his beloved Everton after the Scot took charge in similar circumstances after Marco Silva was axed during the 2019-20 season. Ferguson isn't the first boss to return to the dugout at the same club though. Here, Daily Star Sport runs the rule over the Big Scot and 6 other managers who had multiple spells at the same club. Ferguson is set to begin his second stint in charge of the Toffees after he was handed the reins by the Everton hierarchy this week. The Scot is an iconic figure at Goodison Park and previously stepped in for 4 games after Marco Silva was axed back in 2019. During his playing days, Ferguson also enjoyed 2 spells at the club before he returned to the club, initially on a voluntary basis, after he hung up his boots for good. The late great Howard Kendall is widely recognized as one of Everton's greatest ever managers and, like Ferguson, had more than one stint in charge at Goodison Park. Kendall's first stint in the dugout was one of the most successful periods in the Toffees' recent history, after guiding the club to 2 league titles in 3 years. He also tasted FA Cup and European Cup Winners' Cup glory during his 6 years at the helm. After leaving the club in 1987, Kendall returned to the club for 3 years in 1990 and another short spell in 1997, but he struggled to replicate his previous successes. Kendall sadly passed away in 2015. When it comes to managers going back to old clubs, Martin Allen is pretty much untouchable. The unofficial king of the comeback has had a staggering 5 spells at Barnet over the years, a tally that's almost unmatched in English football. Allen first took charge of the Bees back in March 2003, before parting exactly 12 months later. He then returned on a 3-match basis in the 2010-11 campaign, before returning for another 3 games at the end of the 2011-12 season. Mad Dog then returned for a 4th stint in March 2014, a stay that spanned over 2.5 years. He made his 5th and final return to the club in March 2018, 4 years to the day that he returned in 2014 to try and pull off a remarkable escape to keep Barnet in the Football League. Unfortunately, Allen and Barnet fell just short. But you wouldn't bet against there being more chapters in the intriguing love affair between the 56-year-old and the Londoners. One of England's most iconic managers, amazingly, Warnock has only ever gone back to 2 clubs in his storied career. Of the 16 clubs that Warnock has been at over the past 40 years, only Crystal Palace and QPR have been graced with Warnock's presence on more than one occasion. Warnock spent 3 years at Selhurst Park between 2007 and 2010, before moving on to, ironically, QPR. He then spent 2 years in West London, before returning to Palace for a short stint. After being appointed in the summer of 2014, Warnock was axed just after Christmas following a shocking run of form. Warnock then completed his double by overseeing QPR on a temporary basis for a short period after Chris Ramsey was given the chop by the Rangers hierarchy. Perhaps the most successful manager on this list, Jupp Heynckes has enjoyed 4 spells in charge at German giants Bayern Munich. The 76-year-old started his first stint in charge at the Allianz Arena back in 1987, before returning over 20 years later on a temporary basis. After that short spell at the helm in 2009, Heynckes returned for another 2 stints in the hot seat in 2011 and 2018 respectively. Across his 4 spells with the club, Heynckes won 4 Bundesliga titles and also won the Champions League back in 2013. John Sheridan's seemingly never-ending relationship with Oldham Athletic could rival Allen's love affair with Barnet. Sheridan, who has 5 stints in charge at Boundary Park in total, had 2 spells as a caretaker boss before he was handed the job on a full-time basis back in 2006. After spending 3 years at the club, Sheridan went on to manage at a host of other clubs before returning for the first time in 2016. After keeping Oldham up, Sheridan left again to pen a 3-year deal with Notts County, only to find himself back at Oldham less than a year later after flopping at Meadow Lane. But his 5th and final spell in the hot seat also ended in tears, with Sheridan leaving the club by mutual consent just 8 months after his arrival. Kenny Dalglish is undoubtedly one of the finest players to ever grace the hallowed turf at Anfield. But he's also had 2 stints in charge of his beloved Liverpool, although his 2 spells in the dugout were over 2 decades apart. Dalglish won 3 league titles during his 6-year stint in charge of the Reds between 1986 and 1991. He then stepped in again over 20 years later after Benitez left the club in 2011. His second spell wasn't as fruitful, though, and he was gone after less than 18 months at the helm. Former Juventus defender Niccolò Napoli has racked up a staggering 8 spells in charge of Romanian outfit FCU Craiova. Napoli was actually appointed for the 8th time earlier this year, but it wasn't a popular decision. After arriving at the club, Napoli was reportedly met by the club's fed-up ultras who urged him to get lost. According to reports in Italy, the unimpressed supporters said to him, "We are tired of this soap opera. Come on. We have nothing against you personally, we have nothing to do with you as a human being. But we don't want you anymore. We are tired. Leave us, brother. Leave us."